He's better. You hit your stool.
Well, they got it.
They got this. Okay.
They got it.
Good morning, everyone. I have 9:30. Welcome to the first committee meeting of the new session here. That's right. So a little room change here for today, but in the future we'll be back up in 825. A lot of y'all also serve on another committee that meets in this room, and I just don't want the venue to make you think that we're going to be here that long. So we're going to try to move things along. But I do want to start, since we've got so many interested folks in the room, a little bit off of what the agenda is and go straight to Senate Bill 38 by Senator Allen. This is a bill that passed the Senate last year. I believe it was 168 last year, and passed this committee last year, but didn't matriculate in the House. So Senator Allen's going to give it another try, and we're going to let him come up and talk to us about the bill and get moving. And I just got a tap on my shoulder, Senator Allen. I'm out of practice, which means I haven't called the roll yet. So forgive me. As usual, I'm just chomping at the bit to get your bill moving. But if we can get started with the roll, thank you, Clerk. We'll go ahead and do that.
Senator Albritton. Senator Carnley. Senator Coleman. Senator Gudger. Senator Hatcher. Senator Hovey. Senator Kelly.
Here.
Senator Coleman Madison. Senator Chambliss. Senator Elliott.
Here. Thanks for keeping me straight. Senator Allen, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, committee, for passing the bill last year. And I want to just give you a quick description of what this is all about. It's dealing with the gross receipts. When a business goes and pays their, buys and purchases their business license, that business license is based on the gross receipts. So what this bill does is that you got a gas tax and a diesel tax at the pump. And so what we're trying to do is that when a small business people goes and purchase their business license, is that gasoline and diesel tax is going to be taken away from that gross receipt column, because it's a double tax issue. And so basically that is what the bill does. And so I would just ask you to, of course, I think we do have a public hearing, so it's a very simple bill, and just like for you to consider this once again, and doing the right thing by not double taxing your constituents back home. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Appreciate you bringing your bill back. So just before I let you leave, I do have a question just to clarify. So in this instance where the excise tax is already paid, then that essentially that is being retaxed again under a business license fee by being included in the gross receipts. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Now, earlier this morning, I had a brief conversation, and we are drilling a little bit deeper in that, and that's why I did ask you this morning to have a public hearing and then carry the bill over, because we're going to find out from revenue exactly some details about that question that you asked.
I think that's wise, Senator, and we've got plenty of time. We're just getting started, and this is a good one to get started with. I think committee members will appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and start the public hearing. Let's do this. We've got two opponents and one proponent, and I think it's fair to say that Senator Allen is probably a proponent of his legislation. So let's jump over to an opponent, and let's see if we can have Baker come up and speak to us from the league. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. I'm Baker Allen, Director of Policy and Research for the Alabama League of Municipalities. Here to talk about Senate Bill 38, dealing with excise tax deductions for the business license. You just have a white paper in front of you that outlines some of our major concerns. Instead of just walking y'all through that, I'll just hit the high points real quick. Back in 2006, Act 2006-586 streamlined the business license process, moved from that flat fee structure to a gross receipts model to make it easier to calculate how you should pay your business license, make it fair based on the size of your company. Why the business license is important is because businesses generate economic activity. And that economic activity requires municipal services, requires police, fire, sidewalk build-outs. So when we look at this and delivering those services, we have to ask ourselves, what is the financial impact of this bill going to be? And you'll note on there towards the bottom of the white paper, we've identified $2 billion of potential deductions as part of the definition of an excise tax. No motor fuels were mentioned, but excise tax is a very broad general term in there, and it's not specifically restricted to that. So before moving forward on this bill in general, I think that fiscal note is important to see what those underlying deductions will be and the impact that it'll have on those municipalities. And if the committee has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Other questions for Baker? Senator Kelly.
Baker, I'm glad you'll be working on this in the future, and I just want to commend you because last year I gave you a pretty good task on this when it came up, and you answered those questions very gracefully and good. Some of those concerns we'll review, and I think you need to bring up with Senator Allen a little bit later. Okay?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Baker, I've got a quick question about business licenses in general. When you start looking at gross receipts, is that gross receipts that the business does totally? ABC Corporation, is it their gross receipts in total, or is it the gross receipts in that municipality?
That is a great question. I don't have any of our attorneys here to answer that. I've really focused in on this particular bill and its impact, especially when we talk about those direct sales. So unfortunately, I'm not able to help you with that question.
That's okay. That's a little shot across the bow. I think that one may be coming later. So y'all get to noodling on that one a little bit. Any other questions for Mr. Stratt? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure that we're going to get the fiscal note later on, and since we're waiting on revenue. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I think it'll be less than $2 billion, but I think y'all set the bar, so we'll see what it comes out at.
I guess for me, when we start eliminating tax, and I'm on limited voice, I'm supposed to be on voice rest, and that's hard for me. What are the kinds of what things are being paid for? When we eliminate this tax, tell me kind of what are the possibility of what we will not then be funding, if I'm making sense?
It does. That funding goes into the municipal general fund to address those services like police, fire, sidewalks, sewer, and ordinance enforcement in general. It's kind of how we live in those communities. When people get closer in density, you create new issues, and this allows us to address those issues.
Very good. So, general, yes, ma'am.
One thing, everybody can hear me. We talk about municipalities, and of course, I'm from Jefferson County, urbanized area. But I can see in rural areas, this definitely is going to be hard hit because those are taxes that are definite, they can rely on, and they're already struggling. So you're talking about taking this out, and you're affecting major services that they are required, police and fire. That's safety. adequate roads. We don't have enough roads, particularly in the rural areas. We're trying to do better. But if we're talking about removing this, how are local counties and cities going to maintain those roads that are not state roads?
That is a great question. It would be difficult when you start chipping away that funding. And to kind of add on to that, the state has a lot of great initiatives to help develop these communities. Most of those programs require a match of some sort. So when we start whittling down the funding available, we're losing opportunities that the state has created because you don't have the match funding.
Last question. On the excise tax not yet to be calculated, can you explain that a little bit?
So I went through the Department of Revenue's, this is for fiscal year 2022, and pulled out all things that could be considered an excise tax. That bill doesn't really define what could be considered an excise tax. That opens the door pretty broad. I was not able to find the estimates for those numbers, or break out those numbers to add it to that 2 billion. So that's really a 2 billion plus number of on the estimate side. So those are things, if I get those numbers, we could add them back in and grow that number estimate that I did provide.
Any other questions for Baker? Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank the committee. Thank you.
Chairman,
Yes.
I'm going to have some questions, but I would like you to come by the office and talk to me a little bit about it for some of the other data before we meet again, okay?
Absolutely, we'll do. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Goder. Mr. Kinney?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak with you a little bit on this bill. I'm Philip Kinney, Barton and Kinney lobbying firm. We represent the Petroleum and Marketers Convenience Association, the Retail, Gasoline, and Convenience Store Association. This is, I guess, our third or fourth year we've worked on this bill. And from the perspective of my client, this is a tax upon a tax. So, and as far as I know, that's not a situation that exists anywhere else in the code. And so what we're asking for is the fairness that we don't have to pay taxes on top of taxes that we're collecting, and we're just collecting those taxes and we're distributing them to the localities. And so we're getting charged for doing a process that benefits the cities and some of the counties. It's mostly just municipalities. So I think if you look at this original legislation, there's a provision. It's on page 3, starts at line 68. This is from what's in the law at this point. Gross receipts shall not include any of the following taxes collected by businesses on behalf of any taxing jurisdiction or the federal government. And then the next time, all taxes which are imposed on the ultimate consumer collected by the taxpayer and remitted by, on, or on behalf of the taxpayer to the taxing authority, whether state, local, or federal. So this legislation, this law, contemplates what we're asking to clarify, which we're trying to clarify on line 76, that the excise taxes on the federal, state, local governments, whether called a tax or a license fee. I've got some, and y'all heard this last year. I'm going to give you a little example from our client. Gasoline carriers on average a total of 50 cents per gallon excise tax. If a retail location sells 100,000 gallons of gasoline per month, that equals $50,000 per month in gross receipts that are made up entirely of pass-through excise taxes. The retailer simply collects these taxes on behalf of the government entities and passes them through.
Mr. Kinney, let me stop you right there. So your contention with that statement is that they are paying a gross receipts tax on the tax that they are collecting themselves. So not just on the underlying sale, the underlying commodity, but on the tax that they're collecting on our behalf, essentially.
Yes, sir.
I
That's
understand.
exactly it.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kenny, question I have, okay. I understand where you're going. I'm all about fairness.
Yes, ma'am.
So you all collect the taxes. It's kind of like the beer people, they collect taxes
Mhm.
on behalf and remit it themselves. So that is not bagged out of the gross. It's included and retaxed again.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I see your issue. So it seems like Senator Allen seems like the bill is specific, and correct me, that we are trying to write something here relative to petroleum, gas, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Or maybe that was an example, because the question that I asked you this morning is that who else are we capturing in this net by not being clear on what taxes we are talking about? And so I'm hoping that we can have a very clear, I understand the inequity in this as far as being unfair to the petroleum industry. But I want to make sure that we understand that we don't throw a net out there and all of a sudden taxes that local governments had been depending upon to build the budgets just like the state does. And because of a law that we passed, all of a sudden it's not there. So, and you know, maybe this is really something that we need to delve into, but I'm about trying to get it right.
Senator, I think you bring up a valid point. I think that's Revenue Department is going to be able to help us answer those questions as well. So thank you for that question.
Senator Coleman Madison, I think Senator Allen's right. We're going to dig into that a little bit more with revenue and make sure we're laser focused on what the issue is, what the issue is.
Right, and what I don't want to do is say, okay, this is a situation with one particular entity and just throw it out there and everybody gets caught in the net.
Senator, I think that the doctrine of fairness applies to all of these excise taxes that are in this, whether it's gasoline or other taxes that are collected and remitted by retailers. So this bill does incorporate more than just motor fuels.
Really need to look
We just
at it in detail.
I just use motor fuels
Chairman
as
says.
an example.
And I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Kennedy. We're going to need to nail down a fiscal note on it for the committee. It's good to get the ball rolling, but we're going to nail down a fiscal note and answer these folks' questions. I think it's pretty reasonable to do so. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Absolutely. Next up, the incomparable Beth Lyons. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Good to see all of you this morning. I represent the city of Mobile, and just to bring you some examples, there are a lot of other taxes that are included in the gross receipts. And I would like to remind you, too, this legislature addressed this issue about 10, 15 years ago. The business community, we had a task force. There was a mishmash of gross receipts and other business license taxes around the state, and we came up with this method. So I don't know where the motor fuel marketers were at the table in that or any discussion, but I do know it was an agreed upon method to make things more standard. I would like to also add that beer distributors, wine distributors, alcohol distributors, heavy truck dealers, this bill, any excise tax that a business owner would pay would be included in this. So it's far-reaching. I'll get you additional figures just on behalf of the city of Mobile. You can extrapolate to the other larger cities based on population. We think preliminarily, in conversations this morning and last night, that it's upward of $5 million. And what would we do with that $5 million, Senator? If it's taken away, what would we have to cut? Those are the things I'd like to give you. So I appreciate your interest in this, your ability to want to look at the figures, and I think it's helpful, too, besides just having revenue, is to have some of the figures from your local cities so that you make the choice. Do you want that additional road? Do you want that additional community service? Or do you want to grant the exemption? So I appreciate you taking all that into consideration and listening to me this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Any questions for Beth? Okay, very good. Well, Senator Allen, what we're going to do is we're going to carry your bill over, certainly with a commitment to bring it back up, let some of the members get some of their questions answered, and some of these folks to put some numbers together so that we got a little bit more of a complete picture. But I commit to you to have it back up here in the not-too-distant future. Senator Coleman?
Thank you. Just the last portion of what Beth mentioned as it relates to the various municipalities. Is somebody going to be responsible for putting that together so we can all see how, if we pass this bill, how it's going to impact all of the municipalities? Can the league do that? Somebody do that?
I think there's a league of municipalities in the back
That's what I-
probably charged with that. So,
Somebody do
yep,
that.
Baker stood up. Good job. Great. You're it, buddy.
We'll try to break this out. Obviously, it's a lot easier to take the aggregate data than trying to break that out. It's not always broken out on those business licenses. It could be difficult. We'll work with some cities.
Yeah.
If anybody can do it, it's you, buddy.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, just for you all, that that probably would be big for members to be able to see the areas that they represent, and how it would ultimately impact those municipalities. If you hear what I'm saying.
2 weeks, Baker. Okay. Committee, we're going to carry that bill over, Senator Allen.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you, sir. We're going to get back on the agenda here, Senate Bill 7. And that happens to be mine. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce that one to y'all. This is fairly straightforward, although I know when somebody says that, everybody's hair on their neck goes up. Just when I say it, fair. Well, these may be in order of complexity, so y'all buckle up. So my sheriff brought this to me, and just as we go down the path of increasing the number of school resource officers in schools, which I think we can all agree is a good idea, he's running into an issue and a number of others around the state where we have private schools that would like to have school resource officers. And our law enforcement agencies are not necessarily opposed to that, but there is an attorney general's opinion floating around that currently says they're not allowed to contract with private schools, that these LEAs, law enforcement agencies, are not allowed to contract with private schools. And so what this bill does very simply is it authorizes a local chief of police or a sheriff to contract with a non-public K-12 school for school resource officers. It is permissive in nature, so they may do this if they want to do this. But it does require, if you look at the at page 2, line 33 and 34, shall charge the non-public school the entire cost of whatever that service is. So again, it's permissive, and then it requires reimbursement in total from the private school if we go that route. And I'll answer any questions. Senator Chambliss. Motion by Senator Chambliss, a second by Senator Coleman Madison. Questions?
Question?
Yes, sir.
This extends to as well as homeschooling entities. We're putting, frankly, we're taking our police officers, they post-train, and they're becoming rent-a-cops.
Fair question.
And the extension is this opening up a pattern where any private entity can rent the cop.
So short answer is no, because it's specifically non-public schools in the legislation. It's not beyond that. Now, could there be another piece of legislation? Always, and we do that all the time. But in this instance, this says non-public schools, and again, it's permissive. I cannot envision a situation where a local police chief or a sheriff wants to provide an SRO for a homeschool situation, nor where that homeschool situation could bear the entire financial cost of having a full-time SRO at the location. But your point's well taken. I just think practically when it's implemented, that's probably not an instance that would occur.
Money talks.
I understand. But again, the sheriff would have to be willing to do that. It's permissive.
Just question.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you just have to excuse my ignorance on how the homeschooling apparatus works, but there is a section in here on 29 that says as well as homeschooling entities. What does that mean? Because I have read, I guess, that like sometimes there are homeschools, they come together, like, you know, for extracurriculars and other things like that. So in that situation, my other Mr. Chairman, I could see where there could be a possibility or a scenario when a sheriff or, you know, one of those deputies would go work for that homeschool entity, because that's how it's spelled out in the legislation. And if it's not going to occur, based on what you said, more than likely not, why would we even have it in the legislation?
Well, because it's permissive again, and if there was an instance, a field trip or something like that, where the entity felt like it was required. Again, this all comes back down to providing protection for our kids. And if the sheriff or the local police chief sees this as something that is necessary, then they may, again, it's permissive, and then the cost shall be covered. And so it's one of the reasons this bill is in this committee and not a finance committee of some sort or other, is because the cost is being paid for by the privately by whoever contracts with. And again, it's permissive for the municipality or the county sheriff to do it if they want to, and to determine what that cost is. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
And I seconded your bill because I don't see a problem with it. I mean, the bottom line is that law enforcement protect and serve. And so if there were a case that arose, as Senator Coleman mentioned, and they do get together for large things that they have, it's still a matter of safety. And quite frankly, I know of an instance that they're already doing this as far as the sheriff's department. Now, whether they're allowed to do it or not. But
Don't get any more specific than you already have.
Mr. Chairman, just because something's not unlawful doesn't mean it's lawful and vice versa. So.
Before we go down that rabbit trail, are there any other questions on the legislation? I think this is a good opportunity for a good roll call. So let's start that if we can, clerk. So I have a motion and a second. This is the motion for federal report.
Senator Albritton, Senator Carnley, Senator Coleman, Senator Gudger, Senator Hatcher, Senator Hovey, Senator Kelly,
Aye.
Senator Coleman Madison, Senator Chambliss, Senator Elliott.
That's a great roll, guys. Thank you very much. So that's 10-0. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes, sir.
I've got another meeting I got to go to, if I might, on your SB 10. I've got lots of calls on this, lots of hesitations on this. If you get to a vote, if you would, mark me on the negative on this one, but I got to excuse and get to another meeting. But
We'll miss your comments, too.
I'm sure you will. I have several. We'll hear those later.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day. The witness is excused. Okay, SB 10 is next on the agenda. That happens to be mine as well. And if I may, I will introduce it. There is an amendment, a very small amendment, came to my attention late the other day. Thank you, Senator Albritton. And we'll get on that here quickly, but I wanted to go over the bill real quick. So the bill, again, it's a two-page bill. It is relatively simple to comprehend, although the concept can be debated. In the synopsis, it says specifically that library board members shall serve at the pleasure of their respective appointing authorities. And as a former local government guy, I was surprised that they didn't, frankly. Those of us that have served, almost all of us have served in local government before and made those types of appointments before. And I always thought that our appointments served at the pleasure of the appointing authority. Apparently, in the law governing library boards, that's not the case. And so I had a couple of mayors that had approached me that had concerns about their library board and the autonomy of that library board, mainly as it relates to budget issues and spending money. Now, of course, this handles some other issues as well, but library boards being appointed and then spending municipal revenues without necessarily the consent of the governing body. And so they felt like once they had made that appointment, and you'll see this as a theme with me today, that there's no recourse on those that have been appointed. So this very simply puts responsibility for the library board with the appointing authority, whether that's the council, the mayor, the county commission, however that works. So if you flip to page 2, the bulk of the bill is between lines 34 and 40, where it says each library board member shall be appointed by the governing body of the county or municipality that established the library, so pretty straightforward there. And then 37 through 40 says each library board member shall be appointed to a 4-year term and shall serve at the pleasure of the respective appointing authority and may be removed at any time by a majority vote of the appointing authority. Now, there has been a question about the 4-year term, and I'll simply say this: that syncs up with the terms of your appointing authority. And those of y'all who have made these types of appointments before oftentimes, or know that oftentimes you're looking for somebody to appoint. And so when your new term comes up, you have the automatic ability to look at this and say, yes, this person's doing a great job, I want to reappoint him. Or no, this is kind of an automatic review period. But I do not see a mass exodus of board, appointees. I think we're more often than not looking for those instances. One second real quick, if I can, Senator Gudger, I want to get the amendment clarified there. You've got an amendment in front of you that starts on line 28, and it simply says, except for libraries governed by Section 1194. Well, that's great, Senator Elliott. What does that mean? There are instances where counties and municipalities have cooperated, what a wonderful thing, to create joint library systems. And those members, or those library systems may have more board members. And so it was not my intention to alter what was set up in this joint situation, which are few and far between, but they exist nonetheless. And so I'm simply exempting with this amendment any of those library boards that have been set up between municipalities and counties as far as the number of board members. Can I start with Senator Gudger? And at some point I want to get the amendment adopted and then we can move on. But Senator Gudger, go ahead.
So in this amendment, you're talking about city and county joint coming together to establish a library. So both of those municipalities and the county commissions have appointments to those library boards.
Correct.
Are you saying that those appointments stay with the county commissions and the city during this if they jointly produce the library?
That's correct. So the bill says, hey, you've got 5 members, and what this does is it says, we're exempting those that have joint membership. We're not altering how that joint membership, works. So if they've got 9, the county's got 5, the municipality's got 4, or something like that. I'm leaving that alone.
So it's not just the number; it's the way that they're set up. Also, through this exception.
Correct. Now, just to be clear, the provision that they are still responsible to the appointing authority stays in effect, but it does not mess with the structure, if you will.
Which is what I think everybody here already thought anyway, so that's fine. Coleman has one that's joint, so I just want to make sure they're staying the way it is.
Always want to make sure we accommodate the good people of Coleman.
You should. Thank you so much.
Senator Coleman Madison, did you have it?
And I just wanted to make the statement that I know in the situation with Birmingham, where there's an appointed board, but the bottom line, the finances, the money for financing new libraries, and we've built a number of new libraries, and there's one on schedule to be built coming up. That funding is put in the budget from the city, and so they have to have some type of authority there as far as the decision, because it's a public facility that the city maintains.
I would agree, Senator Coleman Madison. I was just surprised by the number of mayors that were coming to me saying we're hiring an executive director, or the library board is executing a contract with the executive director, and we're on the hook necessarily to pay for that person after the contract's been executed, but they didn't get the approval of the governing authority, the appropriating authority, which as an appropriator, I know we get in that situation all the time. So I am trying to avoid that. Senator Colton.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe I'm just naturally suspicious.
I get that a lot.
I think Senator, what I'm trying to find out from you is, if this is how we've been operating, what has happened? Now, I know my colleagues on the right, you all have been focused on libraries so much of late. And so I'm just trying to figure out what has happened to why we have to have this bill now. Has there been a situation or a particular incident? And I mean, look, I read just like everybody else. I know we had some situations where some folks on the right didn't like some books that may have been purchased, may not have liked some events that were occurring. And what I don't want to happen is a library director basically will be fired because they have a Black History Month program. And so I'm afraid of what we're doing right here. And I'm trying, maybe I'm just naturally suspicious because of what's been going on nationally. And normally I brag about Alabama. And I said, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on in Washington, D.C., a lot of fights that are going on in Washington, D.C. And we have our differences as far as ideology. But I think we do, I thought we did a better job of not getting pulled into some of the national stuff. This bill to me screams kind of being pulled into some of the national debate that has been going on with my colleagues on the right all over the country when it comes to libraries.
Well, Senator Coleman, you and I have worked together for a few years, but I think you could agree that I play cards face up. So I'm going to answer your question just as directly as I can. This bill came to me because of budget concerns for mayors, as I just addressed with Senator Coleman Madison. You are correct. There has been a lot of discussion about libraries as it relates to content, and that has been quite a discussion. I will tell you, I'm tired of talking about libraries too. And I think that at the end of the day, this puts the responsibility squarely where it should be, and that is with each locality, each municipality and county to determine what they want to do with their library from a funding standpoint, from a governance standpoint. And that's not something that the Alabama legislature is involved in, but rather that municipality or that county. And understanding full well that what may be a good thing in Birmingham may not be a good thing or may not be something that we want to see in Orange Beach, and that there are differences and that we have our differences, and that local governments can be in charge of reflecting those differences as opposed to us in the Alabama legislature. And I simply think that's a much better way to handle this conversation than you and I duking it out up here. I also would say this when it comes to the autonomy of library board members. I think there are instances where autonomy is important. I also think there are instances where accountability is important. This is a library board. This is not a federal judgeship. And there are significant differences there. And so I hope that answers your question as directly as I can.
It did, thank you, but I just still have a concern on page 2 when it talks specifically about the removal. The removal of a person. I have major concerns there. And when I think about, you mentioned one of the areas that I represent, but I actually represent 21 cities. And in quite a few of my cities, there is only one minority that is on the city council. And I think what I would prefer and see if you would be amenable to is, instead of removal by a majority vote, a supermajority vote.
That's certainly something we can talk about. I would like, since we don't have an amendment, I'd like to get that amendment drafted, and it's my intention to try to move the bill out of committee. But hey, listen, we worked together before. We can continue to work together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Chambliss.
I am supportive of that concept. What we define as supermajority, it depends on the city and how large. So we got to figure that out. But it needs to be kind of a higher standard than just a simple majority. So I agree with that. And I've had this issue in my community, and one of my communities. It is a local issue, and it relates to whether my grandchild, a 3-year-old or 5-year-old, can go in and walk and pick up something that she's not able or shouldn't be able to see at this point in time. And we've had that. It's a local issue, very local for me. And it's not that it shouldn't be there, but the parents should be involved in that decision. My question is about line item 34 on page 2. It seems like the next paragraph does talk about the respective appointing authority and that kind of thing, but this one does not. So in a joint city-county, which ours is joint city-county, I would like for us maybe between now and the floor to look at this, and maybe there needs to be something added here that addresses that. This member goes back to their respective appointing authority. I think the next paragraph handles that, but it doesn't handle that in the appointment process in this paragraph, if that makes sense.
It does, Senator Chambliss. I think that's handled in the amendment where it says except for libraries governed by. So let's do this. If we can adopt the amendment and get that on there, and then let's run that to the ground.
I'm fine with doing that. I just want to make sure that we're not creating an issue.
But I understand what you're saying. We can get on the amendment, and then we can certainly work on that and make sure that those all fit together.
I move adoption of the amendment.
I have a motion and a second. Are we okay with a previous roll on the amendment? Okay. On the amendment. Okay, very good. So we're going to adopt the amendment using previous roll without objections. Seeing no objections, the amendment's adopted, and now we're on the bill. Are there any other questions or comments on the bill? Clerk, call along roll. Oh, sorry.
I couldn't let you get away with this.
That's okay.
And we were doing so well on day one now. Because I'm always searching for, why are we creating legislation if there is not a problem? I saw a comment that you made in Yellowhammer. And in this comment, you said, you find, I'm quoting you, you find that these types of boards are infiltrated by folks that are not representative of the values of the people of the state of Alabama. What was your comment?
I think so, and I'll add a further clarification if I can.
You said you think so. They said that's what you argued.
Mm-hmm. So just to further clarify, of the municipality that those folks represent and the people in that municipality, and what I was just talking about with Senator Coleman was that those can differ from municipalities to municipalities, from locality to locality, and I think that we would be better served to make sure that on a municipal level, on a very local level, that we leave these types of determinations up to those local entities.
And what we currently have is problematic, which is occasioned this bill.
Well, I think what we currently have is a library board that's not accountable to the appointing entity. That once they are appointed,
why are they not accountable?
Well, they're not able to be removed currently by the appointing entity. And again, that was something that I found shocking as someone.
Give me an example of why would we remove them? Is it because they don't share our values?
Well, I think it's important that municipal leaders have the ability to.
No. See, what you said here is you find that these types of boards are infiltrated by folks that are not representative of the values of the people of the state of Alabama.
I think that library boards ought to reflect the values of the municipality and the people that they represent.
So I saw on a list that was put out, and and I'm wondering about this. I cannot fathom people having a problem with an Amish romance book, right, or mysteries in the state of Alabama, but because we have a thing called free speech, because as you all have mentioned, parents should have the right to decide on what their kids are going to be exposed to, whether we're talking about books, whether we're talking about books in terms of print, or whether we're talking about digitized books that we're not simply leaving it up to the government to make those decisions, right? Because we don't want to create a situation where we become even more guilty of big government. We have parents involved. But when we use the language, infiltrating the values associated with the, now I'm concerned about, so who would these boards be populated with if we don't have what we have now? And what would be their charge? What books, for example, would they be censoring?
Well, Senator Hatcher, you're making, I think, my point maybe more convincingly than I am, and that is that these decisions should be made at the local level. As
And they're not now.
That's correct. There's not this accountability to.
I disagree with that. I don't think that's the case. This is morality legislation that is worse. And what I don't think we can do is necessarily, as much as we may like to, and we have tried, to legislate values and morality issues. We try that. But at the same time, I think it's difficult, it's challenging, because it basically only considers one side of the coin, so to speak. And what do we do about people who don't have, for example, our Christian values? What if there's something else? In a library, that's a public space, not a private library. And I'm saying this now as an educator, because the last thing I want to do is do anything that I think at any level only puts forth Kirk Hatcher's particular brand of value. I can put that out there as an example. But in any educating situation that is worth its salt should be that we have individuals who have the ability to engage in some critical thinking, something that helps them to decide on what eventually should be and will be, certainly as parents, what's best for them. So if we have people who have not been properly vetted in what we currently have in these library boards, is there anything that can be done without some act of legislation, which I think is a slippery slope legislation? I think it takes us into the space of book banning. And I cannot be for that. I cannot imagine that we're going to go back to something like that. And so I think if we are looking at it, I'm looking at the language, this is the thing that caught me. Otherwise, we may have a different piece here. You find that these types of boards, that as they currently exist, are infiltrated, that's a harsh word, by folks that are not representative of the values of the people of the state of Alabama.
Well, again, Senator Hatcher, I think you're probably, again, making my point better than I am. And
I doubt that.
And that is that it doesn't matter what I think.
So if I'm making your point, we don't need this legislation.
No, you're making my point that we do need it, and that is it shouldn't matter what I think, it should matter what the local appointing authority thinks. And so that's where this goes, is that these library boards are accountable to the local appointing authority and are responsive through that authority to the people that they represent and serve. And that is different from municipalities.
Last question. I guess, Senator Chambliss, is for you. Since you mentioned what happened, and I am aware of what happened in Elmore County, in Watauga County. How does legislation help your county to deal with the situation you encountered?
The question is not, in my mind, about censorship or free speech, or I'm not trying to, or I don't support banning books like you're talking about. What I am interested in is having an age-appropriate procedure process. That's all.
And we don't have that now.
No, we don't. We didn't in our case, and the folks that were in our situation turned away from protecting children, protecting the most innocent from things that their mind is not ready to comprehend. And it will be later, but it's not at that age. And in those instances, our community was irate that they would not protect these children. We needed different leadership, not to ban books, not to censor books, but just to make it age appropriate. That's it.
So is any part of this legislation, I promise I'm done, supported by Mothers for Liberty?
I don't.
Because, but they're not involved in in what happened in your county? They were not.
I said I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're involved or not.
Senator Coleman Madison, we're going to let you ask questions, and that's probably going to be it. We're going to move on.
Yes, sir, I know. But this is important. And on face value, and I try to take things as face value. Of course, Senator, your statement, whether correct or incorrect, as you were quoted, just caused me to chill. I'm hoping that the intent of this legislation is, because I believe that there should be some local control, and maybe it was the generalization of reflecting the opinions or the values of Alabama values. If you had said local values, because you constantly refer back to local in your statement here, but not there, goes back to my colleague, both of them really, and the concerns that we have here about access to knowledge. I mean, before my time, but I can remember there's a plaque out there in front of Birmingham Public Library, the archives, that talked about that at one time, blacks were not allowed to go in a public library, access to knowledge. I want our kids to be able to do critical thinking. I want them to be exposed to the world. And I don't want to take an isolated situation and say we need to change everything about the whole state. If my neighbor's kids spray paint the mailbox orange, I'm hoping that that's not something, that's not a trend that we're going to start here. I mean, I'm hoping that they'll change by the time I get back to the house. But anyway, is there anything that can be too specified? Because I see where you're going with this. Currently, the library boards, as they are appointed. So I've always thought that local, I served on city council, and I always thought that we had the control. You have the appointing authority, so when the term comes up, you don't like them, you can remove them. And I guess I'm going back to, since, what does the current law say? And that's what because it goes back to the question that Senator Coleman mentioned, why this legislation? So what does the current law say as far as their authority?
So good question. Again, one that I had as a former local official that I was say confused, but I was surprised that the enabling legislation for local library boards did not allow for the removal of, or didn't say serve at the pleasure of, but rather there was an appointment, and that was it. And so it does not give the local elected officials the ability to govern that delegated authority that they are delegating. It's their authority. They are delegating to a library board. And so this puts that back with some local control.
And basically, and I'm going to try to take your bill for face value, but I do think the Coleman's amendment should be added as far as if you're going to remove somebody, that it should be, that everybody should be in agreement. And you did not take out the fact that local, municipal, or county, or however they are appointed, or jointly, or whatever, they still have the power. I just don't want us to take an isolated situation that happened to us individually and say, hey, let's change the whole law. That's not what we are here for. We are not here to micromanage local government, and I'm not here to take care of every problem in my neighborhood. My neighbor brings me about dogs fighting or whatever, your garbage like I got today. That's a local issue.
I could not agree more, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here.
I'm hoping, and I know the time, but again, we don't want people to leave with the wrong impression. And if it's a local issue where you have an incident that happens, you got a library board. Take it there. First of all, speak to the local librarian. Solve it at the lowest level. But don't come here because I'm a state legislator and let's change the whole law about everything.
Thank you, Senator Coleman Madison. Senator Gudger.
I'm just listening to this conversation, but I just want to make sure to go back to this bill for a second. As elected official, like all of us were for an amount of time, 14 years for me at city council, I had the appointing authority to appoint somebody on a library board, which we did every month or whatever year it was. If something happened, which there wasn't at one point, let's just take an example randomly, but somebody that's on that library board, let's say, for example, had child pornography, right? And was doing obviously things that should not have been done. Would that local authority, the way that the law is written now, have authority to remove that person to get them off? Because it seems like this bill is allowing them to now have the authority to take them off. So we have the appointing authority, but not the removing authority. Is that correct?
On its face, the current statute does not allow for the removal of someone who's been appointed.
So your bill is clarifying that on worst case scenario. So the assuming authority that those municipalities and county commissioners and city councilmen had, that I've always thought we had, honestly, until I read your bill, we don't have on the removing side. The appointing we do. And so your bill is trying to fix that.
That's correct.
All right, now, I'm taking your bill the same way with face value that this is about that issue, not about what Senator Chambliss had talked about, banning books, none of that. So I'm in favor of the bill as we go forward. But if the assumption is for municipal city councilmen, mayors, and county commissioners think they have that authority to remove people, but they don't when something is needed, then this makes perfect sense to me. So just say my opinion. Everyone else was talking, so
I'll take that as a motion for favorable report as amended by Senator Gudger. I have a second. Second by Senator Hovey. Clerk call the long roll.
Senator Albritton, Senator Carnley, Senator Coleman, Senator Gudger, Senator Hatcher, Senator Hovey, Senator Kelly, Senator Coleman Madison, Senator Chambliss, Senator Elliott.
Aye. 7 yeas, 3 nays. The bill receives a favorable report. Thank you, committee. We will move on to something I think we can all agree on. Okay, maybe we can't. Spoke too soon. Senate Bill 12 deals with elected officials. I'll give a brief overview of this one. So we've all had in our communities folks that have participated previously in RSA, whether they're firefighters, police officers, teachers, whomever. And then they subsequently get elected. They run for office after they've retired. They run for mayor. They run for county commissioner. And so what this bill does is it allows those folks to receive compensation in their elected official capacity and still receive their retirement benefits since they've retired. So in my instances, I've got both a mayor and a county commissioner who are retirees. They've come back to continue their public service as elected officials. Again, one as a mayor, actually 2 as commissioners. And I don't want to be in a situation where we are discouraging people from serving in office and having to forfeit the defined benefit that they have earned in order to serve. There is an amendment before you that excludes elected superintendents from this provision, and we can discuss that some more. This is primarily focused on mayors and commissioners. And so, Senator Gudger, did you have a question?
just talking more about the superintendents. I saw that amendment. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the consideration was that elected superintendents are usually pretty well compensated, and the goal here was to focus rather on mayors and commissioners. Now, the amendment's up to be debated, and I'm willing to do whatever the committee would like to do with elected superintendents, but the bill was focused on mayors and commissioners and not elected superintendents. That was brought to my attention by RSA, and I said, let's go ahead and draft the amendment, and we can debate it one way or the other. And I'm fine with whatever the committee decides on how to deal with elected superintendents either way.
I'm going to make a motion on the amendment, but I'd like to talk to you more about it in RSA before we get to the floor, if that's okay.
You got it. I have a motion and a second on the amendment to SB 12. Can we call the long roll so we can get a good roll?
Senator Albritton, Senator Carnley, Senator Coleman,
This is on the amendment.
Senator Gudger, Senator Hatcher, Senator Hovey, Senator Kelly,
Aye.
Senator Coleman Madison, Senator Chambliss, Senator Elliott.
Aye. Okay, so the amendment's adopted. And
Make a motion on the amended motion to
passage as amended by Senator Gudger. Have a second. Second by Senator Hovey. Any further discussion?
Same question really that Senator Gudger has about the impact of the amendment and wanting to hear a little bit more. Who's going to get us that information?
Well, the amendment is pretty straightforward, and it simply excludes elected superintendents. I mean, I can.
Do you mind if I pull that together and I want to come see you too? Because I'm interested in that.
And again, folks, on the floor, if that's an amendment that y'all no longer want to be on the bill, I am completely flexible on tabling the amendment if we need to.
Mr. Chairman, that could be the point for me as well. I just want to. I don't want to hold up the bill. I want to keep it flowing. I do want to get some clarity on some stuff, but I'll be more than happy to bring that to you, Senator, if you'd like for me to.
As may as well.
Okay, I'll do that.
Senator Coleman Madison.
The question I have is, we said, we specify an elected superintendent as opposed to appointed. I mean, do we pay people based on whether you're an elected or appointed?
Senator Coleman Madison, I've had other legislation that did away with this whole cap before for everybody, and I still think that's the way to go. This is a fairly narrowly focused attempt to not penalize folks who have retired under RSA and then subsequently want to serve as an elected official. But I tend to agree with where you're going. I'll share that legislation with you. Happy to co-sponsor it with you if you want to do that, but I'm with you on that. Okay, so the motion is final passage, or excuse me, favorable report as, I've already moved to final passage, I'm moving along. Favorable report as amended, using previous roll.
Abstain. Yeah, 2 abstentions.
Okay, well then let's call the roll. It's okay.
Call the roll.
We're going to call the long roll on this.
Senator Albritton, Senator Carnley,
Auburn said no.
Senator Coleman, Senator Gudger, Senator Hatcher, Senator Hovey, Senator Kelly, Senator Coleman Madison, Senator Chambliss, Senator Elliott.
Aye. 6 with 3 abstentions, the bill receives a favorable report. Thank you, committee.
Whose bill is it?
Just left me, you didn't send me a text. Know anything? I
That's
just
who bill
and
it
I'm
is.
like, where is my office mate?
Hey, when they moved, Tiffany arranged my office and
Uh-huh.
everything.
Well,
That's
Wes
it.
is happy to be in there with me. We served together in the house.
Oh, did-
He cut his, I guess he cut his teeth on me. I
that-
hazed him a little bit
Well,
on his first bill.
Well, don't ease him up on that. Yeah. I like him. He's a good guy. But no, y'all ain't gonna be rid of me. That's my folks. Hello.
How about you?